Hi, I'm Molly Wheeler. I'm one of the deputy directors at the Utah League of Cities and Towns, joined today by Rob, Terry, and Jordan Cullimore from the Office of the Property Rights Ombudsman. Today we're going to be talking about a topic that we get a lot of questions about at the League, impact fees, and we thought it's best just to bring in the state experts on that topic to share their insights with you, the pluses, the perils, as I believe we've called this webinar. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn the time over. Well, actually, not quite. Before I turn the time over to Rob and Jordan, a couple housekeeping pieces. Two pieces. We're going to try to answer your questions throughout the webinar. As the topics arise, we'll also try to have some time at the end of the webinar to answer questions. If you have questions, please enter them in the Q&A box. It makes it much easier to track and make sure we're answering your question. If you enter it in the chat, I'll try to keep an eye out for it, but it's just much easier if it is in the Q&A box. Additionally, we are recording it and we'll have this posted on YouTube later. And Rob and Jordan have already agreed that they will share the slides with us. So once the webinar is over, once we send out that recap video, we will also send you those slides. So with that, it looks like we have about 90 people there. So Rob, Jordan, the time.
You're on mute.
Thank you, Jordan. Appreciate that.
Always the best way to start a webinar, right?
Oh, absolutely. Especially not one being recorded, huh? Terrific. That's going to live in the ethos forever now. No, thank you very much, Molly. Appreciate the invitation to be here today for us both and the introduction as well. As Molly said, my name is Rob Terry. I serve as the statewide land use training director. I'm housed out of the Office of the Property Rights Ombudsman, and I'm joined today by my boss, Jordan Cullimore, who is the lead attorney in the Office of the Property Rights Ombudsman as well. So we've been invited today to have discussions about impact fees. Molly was the one that had the idea here for what I thought was a terrific title, the pluses and the perils. And so we're going to go over impact fees. We're going to touch on a lot of things from the basics, maybe into some more details as questions might come up, but really talk about what impact fees are and what they aren't and what the state law says about it. So with that, Jordan's going to do just a quick introduction on what the office is, what we do, and how we have the opportunity to work throughout the state. Jordan?
Thanks, Rob. So we always like to take a minute whenever we meet with local officials and anyone really to let them know who we are, what we do. So the Ombudsman's Office has been around since the mid-90s. And we primarily have four main functions that we perform. We like to let everyone know that we're housed in the Department of Commerce. We are an independent, neutral agency, so we don't represent the state. We don't represent any individual party, but we are here as a resource for everyone and to help educate, train, and also provide dispute resolution services. So as you can see there, information and education. We on the phone a lot with people. We try to be available. If you check out our website, you can see there, propertyrights.utah.gov. You can get our phone number, and we're happy to give you our email addresses. And we try to be available when you need answers to questions that you have. Anything related to land use or eminent domain or other property rights issues that you might be dealing with. So give us a call and we'll happily talk with you about that. We also provide negotiation and mediation services to help if disputes do arise, to come in and help provide those services to move the ball forward and resolve disputes as needed and where helpful. And we also provide advisory opinions. So you can actually go on to our website and see the advisory opinions that we've produced over the years. And they kind of act and have a good reputation of also being an education tool. But in a case where there is a dispute between a local entity and a property owner or a developer over a specific land use application and a legal question related to that application, then you can come to our office and ask for an advisory opinion where we'll get the positions from both sides and look at the issue and provide an opinion that will act as a dispute resolution tool to help to resolve that dispute. So those are some of the things we do. Also in providing education, we do these types of webinars a lot. We also love to come to you guys. So if you're a planning commission or council or local officials need training and that will be specific to your needs, we're happy to come to where you are and provide that in meetings that you guys have. So use us as that resource, and hopefully we can be helpful to you guys.
Excellent. Thank you, Jordan. Then wanted a quick call out here, of course, for the League of Cities and
Robert,
Towns, who's
Rob, it
hosting
looks
the
like
webinar.
there's a request to make the slides full screen. They're kind of like in a presentation mode right now.
Oh, are they? Okay, let's see here.
So maybe it's on the wrong screen. Did you share the
No, not sure why it looks proper on my side, but let's see what we can do here. Is that better?
There we go.
All
Perfect.
right, terrific.
Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, I wanted to make sure that we had a call out here for the Utah League of Cities and Towns, who's hosting this webinar today. They serve the 255 cities and towns throughout the state of Utah, do an excellent job at representing municipal government interests. I don't know how they cover as many bases as they do with the amount of staff that they have, but they are absolutely phenomenal, great partners, and we're happy to work with them all the time, and grateful again for the invitation to be here today. So thank you to the League. And then also a resource that was initially started by the League of Cities and Towns, but is now actually housed within our office, is the Land Use Academy of Utah at luau.utah.gov. And this serves as your home for land use training and technical resources throughout Utah, really a central repository of planning information, planning documentation, examples, guidebooks, videos, presentations, you name it, all things training and education related. So you can scan the QR code right there. It'll take you right to the website, or you can just type in luau.utah.gov and go to the website there as well. And it's growing every single day. Every time there's a new resource that's created within the state of Utah, or even an amended resource that is then uploaded to the Land Use Academy of Utah for open and free use by everybody. Okay, so with all of that background, let's jump into some of the basics of impact fees. Before we get started, of course, a quick disclaimer. This is going to be just a general overview of impact fees throughout the state. So oftentimes, as in most planning and local government things, there's going to be questions and issues that are going to be very specific to your individual community. So while general information is always extremely helpful and a great thing to set that foundation and the base of understanding, when you have those specific scenarios, please always ensure that you are consulting the state statutes, you're taking a look there, that you're talking to your local legal representation, that you're referencing your local ordinances, things of that nature. As always, if you need any assistance, any feedback or customized type of help, you can reach out to the Ombudsman's office, and we're always there to help. Okay, so curious to know, this is a Slido to get us started for those that we have on the call right now. Curious to know, does your community currently have impact fees? So if you want to either scan the QR code there or go to slido.com and enter in that code, and we'll give it maybe 10, 15 seconds or so to see how many communities. This is to help us as we're going through the presentation to really understand more of who the audience is. Are we talking to more communities that do have impact fees or communities that do not currently have impact fees? Just a few more seconds here. And we will be doing a few more Slido slides near the end of the presentation as well. So please be ready and prepared for those items. Okay, it looks like the majority of our participants do currently have impact fees, and so we will do our best as we're going through the presentation to ensure that we are putting as much focus on those that do have impact fees right now as opposed to those that don't, while still ensuring, of course, that we are seeking to cover all of those items. And as always, all questions are welcome. Okay, so first and foremost, what are impact fees? Very simply put, they're a one-time charge that's imposed by local government upon new development activity as a condition for development approval. The point of them is to mitigate impacts that are going to be realized on local infrastructure that is caused by that new development. And the fees themselves are intended to help fund the expansion or the enlargement of public facilities that are necessary to accommodate that new growth. The important part here is that they're then intended to maintain that same level of quality of public service for all residents. So they're not for expansion and they're not for enhancement. They are an item that is to mitigate and maintain. So very important items that we want to make sure understood there. They are, of course, a form of an exaction, which means that they're a mandatory contribution of land improvements or fees to a governmental entity as a condition for development approval. Impact fees are not seen as taxes, special assessments, building permit fees, hookup fees, project improvement fees, or other reasonable or permit application fees. So it's important to understand that they are unique and separate from those items. So what is the history of impact fees in Utah? Believe it or not, impact fees were created by the state legislature, but through the Impact Fee Act, which is codified in 1136A of the Utah Municipal Code. But there was a lot of conversation before that that had to do with fees and impact fees in particular. But what that act did in 1995 was it shored up the authority of local governments to provide clarity on calculations, implementation, and the actual use of the fees. And it codified the principles that came from key court cases in Utah and Supreme Court, National Supreme Court, prior to 1995 that gave a lot of that context and set the foundational items for them. You see the main ones listed right there. You had Call versus City of West Jordan, multiple iterations of that, Banbury Development Court versus South Jordan in 1981, and then of course the U.S. Supreme Court cases that really set so much of the impact fee foundation and rhetoric between Nolan Dolan and Kuntz over the years. So within the statute there is some very specific items that are pointed out that are allowed uses of impact fees. That includes water rights for water supply, treatment, storage, and distribution facilities, wastewater collection and treatment facilities, stormwater drainage and flood control facilities, municipal power facilities, roadway facilities, parks, recreation, open space, and trail facilities, public safety facilities such as police and fire, environmental mitigation. I will say that this one is more in limited cases, and there is federal or state regulated conservation plans that come along with that. So certainly if there's items that you're looking at there, you will want to make sure that you are aware of that, put a little more thought into the process there. And then municipal natural gas facilities. So as you can see, these are all public facilities intended to serve the public at large. So what we saw the permitted uses. What are some of the prohibited uses of impact fees? Prohibited uses, you cannot construct jails or prisons with impact fees. You cannot acquire fire suppression vehicles that cost less than $500,000. And residential impact fees cannot be used for any fire suppression vehicle. So important to note there, because residential impact fees for many communities are the most commonly collected fee. So curing existing infrastructure deficiencies. You cannot, if you have issues with current infrastructure that is being operated within your community, you cannot use the collection of impact fees and use those fees to then address any of the deficiencies that you currently have. You cannot use them to increase the level of service of existing infrastructure through existing demand through those impact fees as well. So closely related to the previous one there, whether it's curing deficiencies or increasing the level of service, you cannot utilize impact fees to do that. There is an exemption that exists if there's an independent funding source and it's in place to raise that service level for existing demand within 6 years. So there's some items there where you can get into collaboration, but it has to be very well documented, agreements in place, and it has to be very clear to the person that is paying the impact fee that there may be some agreements or understandings there that those dollars could be utilized in partnership with other areas of funding. And you cannot fund the operation and the maintenance of public facilities. Somebody have a question?
Rob, we do have our first question coming in.
Yep.
Can impact fees help pay for a new public works building that is being built to accommodate the growing community?
Jordan, you want to take that one? It looked like you were thinking about it.
That's a good question. I mean, typically public, or when you're charging an impact fee, it's for the actual public facilities. Public works building is kind of I would be reticent to use impact fees for that type of building, although admittedly I haven't thought through that one very deeply. So Dana, if you want to reach out to us individually and we can work through kind of what the situation you're looking at. But generally speaking, you do want to hew, and Rob, if you want to go back a few slides to the permitted uses. I mean, that's kind of what we'd look to so stormwater drainage and flood control facilities, wastewater collection and treatment facilities, water rights and supply treatment, storage and distribution facilities. To me, those do not contemplate a public works building in this context for impact fees specifically. So.
I will say it's in some of the language that we have recently been reviewing and having discussions about, much of it really ends up simply being on the side for the local agency of documentation, right? And how transparent the process is. And so if there is discussions that you're putting out there about the use of impact fees, the identification of the use of those fees in line with how you need to be preparing your infrastructure fees, facilities plans, and things of that nature, other type of documentation. The thought process there is certainly areas where it can be a little more customized to the needs of individual agencies within the guardrails that are set within state statute.
Excellent, thank you. Couple pieces of housekeeping. I see some pieces coming up in the chat. One, please use Q&A for questions if you can. It's much easier to track if you can use the Q&A box. This is being recorded and it will be shared later, as will the slides. So we have that there. We do have one question coming in. What is the definition of facilities? I don't know if you guys want to tackle that now or at the end. I know we still have quite a bit of progress to make through your slides.
Yeah, each facility is kind of defined. There isn't just a general definition of a facility, right? And that is a good question. Typically, when I've thought about it, I've thought about the actual infrastructure that you need to provide the services. But there is probably some room in there for interpretation for sure.
Yeah, there is specific definitions that are found within the code section as well, within 1136A. I don't think that facility itself, but there are some specifics that get in there that could help to provide some additional context or light to that item and for the specific need that agency may be looking at.
One, for instance, that it does get into specifically is a public safety facility, and that it does include specifically buildings constructed, right, to house police, fire, other public safety entities. So from that, right, but whereas the ones related to public works, water rights, water supply, treatment, storage, and distribution, wastewater collection and treatment, stormwater drainage, and flood control facilities, those ones seem to be a lot more specific in defining the actual facilities that provide the services as opposed to buildings related to it. That's my initial blush related to that, the public works building question. So.
Yeah, if you have more specific questions on that one, feel free to reach out to us and we can cover that one for you as well. Okay, some other really important items to understand about the prohibition on use of impact fees. Impact fees cannot serve as a general revenue measure, right? Which means that they are collected for very specific activities that have to be identified, and then they have to be utilized for those specific activities or projects that are identified. They can also not fund parks that are being funded with school district or charter school impact fees. You cannot have impact fees for public safety law enforcement for institutions that have their own police force. Some examples there, like the Utah National Guard, the Highway Patrol, state higher education institutions. And then, of course, no school impact fees on new development to fund capital improvements for schools that are being necessitated by new development. And then recently, I wanted to throw this note in here because you've had so much more conversation about accessory dwelling units, and in particular, in the last couple of years, the by right internal accessory dwelling unit. You cannot charge impact fees for internal accessory dwelling units. So now those are allowed by right. You also cannot charge those impact fees for them. So certainly something at the local level to be aware of. So
Question,
yep.
Rob, that came in, that I think is an interesting one, kind of tying to what is allowed and impactful and not. Can impact fees be charged to those outside of the city that wants to participate with the city's infrastructure, like water?
Charged by outside,
For those outside the city.
would
Is
that
this
be like a service provider? I'm not 100% sure exactly what they would mean by that question.
Okay. We might just, Becky, we might have you follow up with Jordan and Rob after the webinar
Yeah,
to
maybe
dig
send
into
something with a
that
little
in a
more
little bit more
context on there
detail.
so we can make sure we get you the right answer.
Perfect. All right, thank you.
Yep. So what's the general process of establishing your impact fees? First and foremost, you need to establish the necessity for them. And this is a very, very important item for communities simply because you then end up asking some questions that are going to be really relevant to whether or not impact fees are right for your community or right for your community even at this time. I'll touch a little bit more on that in the next slide, but step number one, establish the necessity for them. Number two, you'll then move into public noticing, and you'll notice that you're going to do an intent to prepare an impact fees facility plan, or sometimes referred to as the IFFP. Now, an impact fee facility plan is only required for communities that have a population of 5,000 or more, and that's based upon the last census, and charge impact fees of $250,000 or more per year, right? So also an important step. If you're a smaller community and you are considering impact fees, you feel it's the right thing for your community, but you're under 5,000 and you're not going to be collecting $250,000 or more of impact fees within a year, then an impact fee facility plan would not be a requirement as part of this process for you. But you do have to meet all of the remainder of the criteria, of course, to establish impact fees. So after you've done your noticing there, if it does apply to you, you will then prepare the actual impact fees facility plan. You'll then do public noticing of your intent to prepare an impact fee analysis or an IFA. You'll then prepare that impact fee analysis. That's where you're going to get into the very specifics of how the fee is calculated. You're going to take a look across your community and what you have, what you need, growth patterns, everything of that nature. That's where the math is really going to end up coming in to a much larger and more specific degree. You will then make sure that those documents are made publicly available. You'll then do your noticing of intent to adopt an impact fee enactment and your noticing for public hearing, of course, associated with that. And then you will have that public hearing and complete the adoption of the impact fee enactment. And then you move into the actual administration of administering these impact fees. So on the administration side of impact fees, you will establish and maintain separate interest-bearing accounts for each type of impact fee, right? So you don't just simply say we're going to adopt impact fees and then we're just going to collect one large fee and it's going to be spread out amongst all these items. The fees actually have to be specific to the projects and the activities that you are collecting that fee for. And those fees then need to be kept in a separate interest-bearing account. And if you do not ensure that they are expensed or encumbered within 6 years of collection against a system improvement that is identified in your IFFP or is identified in your fee analysis or your capital facilities plan. If an IFFP was not required, then you have to actually deal with refunds. And refunds also include, I think it's important to note, the interest that was bared within that separate account for that item. So all of that ends up needing to be refunded. And again, that is within that 6-year period if the item has not been expensed or encumbered. I will say there is language within the statute that does allow for agencies to hold those funds longer than 6 years, but you have to make very specific findings as to why that is necessary for that item. And you still have to continue to administer them appropriately, report to the state auditor on all those items. And there is annual reporting that is required to be sent to the state auditor for all funds. And if that's anything, the justification of holding something longer than a 6-year period, that would also need to be included within that.
We have a couple questions.
Yep.
Coming in relating to some smaller communities. So for those smaller communities, how would you determine impact fees without the IFFP? And kind of tying into that, there's something else I think kind of helpful to handle these paired together. Code says smaller communities can use the general plan instead of developing an IFFP, but it seems to say that a general plan to provide the same analysis that the IFFP would. So basically, you'd have to do all the technical work you're already doing in an IFFP, but you'd put it in the general plan instead of a separate document. Is that correct? So can you just give the smaller communities an idea of what they have to do if it is not an IFFP?
Sure. Yeah. So the analysis would be similar to what you would do in an IFFP, but it doesn't have to be collected in that individualized document that the IFFP would be. You can utilize existing documentation that you have to make those same type of findings and tie those strings together, like your general plan, your capital facilities plan, things of that nature. So the intent there, of course, for the smaller communities is to avoid them having to take a deeper dive into documents that they already have, but to utilize the resources that they already have at their disposal. So, but it does, you will have to make similar type of analysis or make similar type of points, because you have to be able to identify the specific needs that you have, and you still have to then be able to identify anticipated costs, anticipated timelines, everything of that nature that's going to be associated with your impact fee. Jordan, do you have anything additional you'd want to add to that?
No, I think these are really great questions because I've kind of had similar thoughts as I've dealt with impact fees over the years, and because the reality is when you're talking about impact fees, to ensure that they are legal and lawful, you want to make sure that they not only comply with the Impact Fees Act, but they comply with constitutional principles, right, related to exactions and proportionate fair share and things like that. So yeah, I think the intent of the legislature was to kind of give local communities some leeway and not have as significant of a burden on them to go pay a consultant and conduct a full impact fee facilities plan. But nonetheless, you need to go through that same exercise, right? As Rob said, of kind of identifying, okay, what facilities do we have? What facilities do we need? What facilities are going to be contributed to new growth? And ensuring that because that's what the statute says, right? You still need to, even though you're not producing that full report, you need to go through the process of identifying everything. And to that point, when to Chris's question, using the general plan instead of the IFFP, when I read that, what that says to me is, yeah, like if you include it in your general plan, then you don't need a separate document, a separate IFFP document. You can just have that. You can refer people to the analysis in your general plan. But that section is going to look pretty much exactly like what a separate IFFP would look like, as I understand it. So yeah, I think you're thinking about it exactly right, Chris. Hopefully
Yeah, and the way that you go through and you adopt your impact fees and get them in place, keeping in mind that any of these type of items, of course, the state law allows for agencies to do that. So it provides the allowance for that, it provides some guardrails and some general context, and but the onus of it really does end up going, of course, onto the local agencies, which means that as the local agencies are putting these items in place, the documentation that they're placing, that they're going through, everything needs to be done to their comfort level, that they believe that something provides enough documentation, that something provides enough data, enough analysis for them to feel comfortable in taking the actions that they're going to take. Because if there were to ever be a challenge against any of those items, the challenge, of course, is going to be against the city. So the city is really the one that needs to understand whether or not they have a comfort level with something and a process that they're going through, obviously consistently referencing what state code is, and like Jordan had said, takings law and everything of that nature to ensure that you are being mindful and considerate.
So to that question, right, for smaller communities, how would you determine an impact fee? I mean, to me, really, with impact fees, it's really important that you're never cutting corners. And so really, I would say it's the same way that a larger community would do it, and that you're hiring experts, you're hiring consultants to gather the data and to do the analysis to ensure that that calculating a fee that attributes to each individual user their fair share contribution to those capital facilities that you're going to need to service that new growth. So,
yeah, to Jordan's point where he had just said, hiring consultants, utilizing experts to come in and do data analysis there. That is that very first question that I was saying that local agencies and small local agencies in particular really need to stop and think about that, establishing the necessity. That is that step number one. Is this necessary for our community? Is this right for our community? So first, you want to ask yourself that. Are we at a place where our community needs impact fees right now? And do we have the infrastructure in place? Infrastructure meaning the people, the budget, the funding in place. So some questions that I have found to be very helpful over time as you're considering that step number one in that very first set of questions of whether or not you want to be able to have them or even maintain them within your community is, one, are we a fast growing community? Are we seeing a lot of applications and a lot of growth coming in? It doesn't make sense to establish impact fees if you're not going to have enough applications and growth and development that's coming in, that those fees are then actually going to end up actually making sense. Are they going to outweigh what you spent getting fees into place in both the data and the analysis and the administration of the fees, which of course is an everyday item moving forward after they are adopted. And so do you have that capacity to administer that entire process, the annual reporting, the maintaining of the accounts, everything that comes along with it? And is all of that going to outweigh the administrative responsibilities? So very important in that very first step to think about that from that aspect of whether or not it makes sense for your community. Does it outweigh those fees outweigh? And keeping in mind the fees are specific. It's not like it's just general revenue, right? They can only be spent on the certain items that they were identified for. So is that worth it for your community? Okay, so that covers the basics. Yeah.
I'll add, Rob, one way, and if you want to go back to that last slide, one way that I've often thought about it is, there's two ways you can do impact fees. You can come up with your facilities that you need, and then you can find other revenue sources to build those facilities, right? And then you can start building those on a certain timeline, and then as the impact fees come in, you can use those impact fees to reimburse or pay the bonds down or do whatever, right? And so again, that kind of contemplates and assumes that you have a pretty steady revenue source, or you hope that you do, right? Or at least that if you don't have one, that you recognize that, yeah, you're probably going to be paying it in these other ways. But if the fees come in, then you have them there available to mitigate the burden, right? The other way, and this is the kind of the more difficult way, is and what I've heard is really only useful and possible if you have a really fast growing community, is you wait for the impact fees to come in, and then once you have that critical mass, then you build the facilities, right? And that's just all to say that those are typically the two ways you see impact fees work. And if you have a community where you don't have those revenue sources that would support either of those approaches, then yeah, you may want to sincerely question whether or not an impact fees are going to be an appropriate tool for what you're wanting to do.
Yeah, we recently had some communications with a smaller agency that had impact fees, and they were collecting impact fees, but had very limited other sources of revenue coming into the city. And so the projects that they were looking to build with those impact fees, they knew were going to take longer than even that 6-year period. And so there was then discussions about whether or not, because of all of those limitations there, could they hold those fees longer than 6 years in order to complete those projects. And again, like I said, there is language within the statute that does allow for that, but the agency has to be able to, in writing, ensure that they are making the appropriate findings that would then support that there. And the language does not state exactly what those findings need to be. It just simply states that they have to be in writing. And that the circumstances have to be identified by the local agency and then supported. So once again, the onus for whether or not an agency feels comfortable with making a finding and feeling that that is a defensible finding really ends up being on the local agency, which once again is that flexibility to the local agency to address things the way that they feel that they need to be addressed, but it has to be done in an upfront and a transparent manner in a way that they feel it's defensible. Okay, so we're going to do just a little bit of basic review here, unless we have any questions, Molly, that you're seeing right now that you think that we need to address before we jump in. Just a couple of slides.
We have a handful of questions. You guys let me know. Would you rather just finish the presentation and then do questions, or do you want to?
I just had a couple of Slido review items here, and then we were actually going right into Q&A. So why don't we just
wrap? Yeah, perfect.
Okay. All right, guys. So if you want to scan here, go to slido.com and type in that code. We had just a couple, quick review items, hopefully that are going to help everybody feel comfortable with remembering what these things are. So, what description best defines an impact fee? Is it an ongoing charge that's imposed by local governments to fund the maintenance of existing infrastructure? Or is it a one-time charge imposed by local governments to mitigate the impact on local infrastructure caused by new development? We'll take a few seconds here and let people go through and have fun with this one. Look at that. 100% of the people got right. Terrific. So that is correct. It is a one-time charge that is imposed by local governments to mitigate the impact on local infrastructure caused by new development only. So it's not an ongoing item and it cannot fund the maintenance, which is why the other one was not correct. Okay. Are local agencies required to have impact fees in the state of Utah? Once again, another 100%. Terrific, guys. No, you are not required. It is a choice whether or not you want to have them established. Jordan, any thoughts on that one?
Got some A+ students here.
Yep. I mean, I assume that's exactly what we would get. Okay. What is the first step in establishing your impact fees? Is it preparing an impact fee facilities plan? Is it establishing the necessity for impact fees? Or is it preparing an impact fee analysis? Oh, a little bit of split there. Okay, so majority of you though did get it right. The very first step, as we discussed, is establishing the necessity for impact fees, right? So that's where your agency is going to need to actually have those conversations and take a look. Do we need impact fees? Do they make sense for us? Are we a fast-growing community? Do we have the administrative capacity? Do we have the dollars that would be needed to go through the actual analysis to then have the documentation to establish these items? So while you certainly then progress to an impact fee facilities plan after you have established the necessity for impact fees, if applicable to you, right? Over 5,000 in population from the last census, and we'll be collecting more than $250,000 a year in impact fee. And then you move to the impact fee analysis. So step one, establish necessity for impact fees. Step two, prepare an impact fee facilities plan if applicable to your community. And step three, go into the impact fee analysis process. They all, of course, have noticing and process associated with it, but in general, those are those first three steps. Okay, which of these is not a permitted use for impact fees? Wastewater collection and treatment facilities, parks, recreation facilities, open space and trails, or construction of jails or prisons? I have a feeling that we're going to get back to 100% here. Perfect. Yep, not a permitted use. Tom, congratulations. You can collect your prize at the door. Okay, for those of you, I tried to word this question here for both agencies that did have fees and those that didn't. What is your largest challenge of either creating or administering impact fees for your agency?
If you want in the chat box to put what your other challenges are, that might be helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. Unfortunately,
understand.
Slido didn't allow for us to say other and input the item here. So it looks like though pretty decent spread. Most of the challenges on the administrative capacity side, but a lot of the establishment cost as well. And I would, especially for those smaller agencies right now, put a plug in for the LAA program, the Local Administrative Advisor. They are coordinated by the league, of course, but placed in each one of the AOGs throughout the state. And the intent of the positions is for them to be able to provide administrative support and services for agencies that do not have full-time administrator. Molly, if I misspoke in any way, shape, or form there, please jump in and let me know. But I know that LAAs throughout the state have been very helpful in addressing questions about impact fees with individual communities, and in particular, those smaller communities that either have impact fees and may be struggling with the appropriate application reporting, or those that are considering impact fees. And obviously, you can also utilize us as a resource there as well. Molly, anything I misspoke on the LAA side there?
Nope, you nailed it.
Okay, terrific. Yeah, great program. So highly recommend for agencies to use that as much as they can.
Points
Yeah.
out in the chat, Robert points out in the chat that one of their biggest challenges is public acceptance of the true cost of the necessary infrastructure, which is a huge one, right?
Yeah.
And that's one of those ones that um, is a challenge for, I think, all public officials as they're trying to provide services to their communities, for sure. So,
And I think where that documentation becomes so incredibly important, because if someone is going to challenge the establishment of an impact fee, or what the actual fee is being proposed at or has been adopted at, they do have the right to challenge those items, right? You can and will get challenged along that process. So having the appropriate documentation, that data, and the analysis behind why a fee was identified at what it was identified at is extremely important for an agency to have that validity behind what their fee is.
many of you may probably be aware of this, but this is a big topic, kind of at a state level right now, because there's an understanding and there's a conversation, right? And Molly, you can speak to this, between developers and the league about, hey, we have a housing crisis. We need more housing units. We have a shortage. And you hear the developers saying, yeah, we need more entitled lots. And you have the local community saying, hey, we have entitled lots, but someone needs to provide the system infrastructure, the public facilities, right? That's going to service those lots. And it's difficult because when we're talking about project improvements, individual subdivisions, yeah, it's easy to impose exaction requirements to provide local roads and local facilities. But it's much more difficult to coordinate kind of the more system-wide and public facilities that we're talking about today. And one of those ways to do it is through impact fees, but it can be kind of an imperfect tool at times. And because communities don't necessarily have the political will or the ability to accommodate all the infrastructure that needs to come all at once. At the state level, there is a big conversation, I know, like with the statewide housing plan, right, that's being developed right now. There's a lot of talk of, okay, how can we provide other means for providing the infrastructure? So that's not necessarily a solution. It's just a recognition of the issue and the problem, and maybe even if you were to reach out to your legislators and let them know, hey, this is a really important issue for our community. It seems like there's a lot of talk about it and a lot of interest in trying to find solutions for other ways to fund these public facilities and infrastructure that are needed to serve new development. So.
Yeah, and make sure league representatives, of course, know where your local agency, stands, where they're coming from. One of the major deliverables, of course, that the league does is to consistently lobby for policy items at the state level that are in the interest of local agencies, and recognitions of challenges and opportunities and struggles and everything that may be going on there. So it's extremely important, of course, for their staff to have a consistent feel of the pulse of what the needs are, what the challenges are. And I know the league does a phenomenal job at that already, but they can only continue to do that if they're getting good and consistent feedback from local agencies.
Rob,
Yeah.
knocking it out of the park, doing my job for me. Love it. Okay, a couple of questions that we have coming in through the Q&A. So I'm going to start with this one. It's a little long, so stick with me. So questions about the advisory opinion suggesting that a new IFFP and IFA must be done if the new or replacement school facilities did not appear in the original IFFP or IFA. Those studies are really expensive and time consuming. And because school districts do not share their future plans in advance and do not need municipal permission to build, so it's impossible to include future school facilities in an analysis before they are built, and often too expensive to redo the analysis afterwards. Do you have any thoughts, ideas, or best practices with how to approach this?
Yeah, that is a really great question, Brian. And I think you probably had some conversations with Rick in our office, and there is that advisory opinion out there. So the legal requirement And to be clear, and you understand this, I just want to clarify based on how it was asked, but you can't impose, you notice that school facilities specifically, right? They weren't an allowed facility type for which you can impose an impact fee. But in certain cases, and when a school directly necessitates the need for other types of infrastructure and facilities that are on that list, then you can charge impact fees to schools for those reasons. And for those facilities that are needed to serve these schools, it's a great question, and I don't know that I have a great answer for it. Other than what the law requires is that, yeah, if you are going to charge an impact fee for a facility, then that facility needs to be included on your impact fee facilities plan. And so when we went through that analysis and provided that opinion, the best solution we could come up with and the best advice we could provide is yeah, the law requires that if you want to charge impact fees for a specific facility, then that facility needs to be in your impact fee facilities plan. So you need to find a way or figure out how to include it in there. I don't know that I have a lot of insight into kind of the process of how local governments and schools communicate with one another, other than when I did work in municipal government, I knew that was a real concern, right? It was always kind of trying to figure out, okay, where are the schools going to be? And hopefully you can coordinate with the school district. Hopefully you have a good relationship with the district and you know what property they own, or they can identify in advance where they're going to need facilities so that you can do good planning, right? And figure out, okay, what water and sewer facilities, what road facilities are we going to need for that area? And get ahead of the curve and include those facilities in your impact fee facilities plan, if I understand the question right. And that's actually really good information and feedback that, hey, it's in retrospect, as far as adding these facilities to our plans, it's a real big burden. We kind of anticipated that would be the case, but I don't know any other way to get around the legal requirement at this point. So.
Thank you. Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. So next question, can you further explain roadway facilities and how impact fees can be used for roads?
Yeah, so roadway facilities, that does include not only the road, but anything appurtenant to a roadway facility. So your, curb gutter sidewalks, your park strips, your kind of the whole, what you would imagine would be within that cross width that you identify, right? And your standards and specifications for roads. And so, yeah, just identifying. Now, again, impact fees, and we talked a little bit about this, and hopefully there's an understanding. Impact fees are used for what we refer to as system improvements or facilities that are going to serve a larger region or area, right? So when we're talking about roads, you can use impact fees to fund what we typically think of as arterial roads, collector roads, major and minor, those types of things. You're not going to be using impact fees for, roads that provide local access within subdivisions. But as far as those facilities that you've identified on your master transportation plan and your impact fee facilities plan, yeah, you just want to identify, okay, here is the road facility that we need and everything appurtenant to that road facility. And then you can use impact fees to pay for those identified facilities. Hopefully that's responsive to the question. I'm seeing also
Thank
the
you.
one, Molly, from Deborah. Some cities supply
Yes.
water and sewer for properties outside the city limits. What are the rules related to imposing impact fees for those properties? So that's helpful clarification from the last one. And yeah, I mean, the issue there is that you want to make sure that you identify the service area, right? And your service area is going to capture all the properties that are going to need to be served. And then it's doing an analysis of what facilities do we need to serve that area. So if you're in a community where you do provide services to properties outside of your municipal boundaries, then just ensure that whatever your service area is, because yeah, typically a lot of times you'll see a service area that will simply track the municipal boundary. Sometimes you have multiple service areas within a city, if it's a larger city or has different, kind of needs or topography in certain areas. But if you're in a case where you actually provide services to people outside, then to make sure that you're charging an appropriate impact fee, you just want to make sure that those areas are included in your service area, and that you're considering those areas when you're calculating your impact fee. And then if you've done that, there should be no issue, as I see it, with charging an impact fee to those individuals who are in that service area.
Keeping in mind that you can't charge anything that's going to try to, fix any issues that you've had in the past. If they're currently receiving services out there, it can't go toward deficiencies or even upgrading their item or something of that nature. So just be mindful of that. I know I've had a lot of communities reach out with questions about service provisions for properties and developments that are outside of their municipal boundary, but they're still providing services, and the costs that are associated with that. So that's why it's really important for local agencies to be very mindful about where you're willing to stretch your services to, right? Oftentimes, items of annexation really come down to the question of agencies annex for service provisions, right? What are the benefits of somebody annexing property into a municipality? And that's usually access to municipal services. And usually you'll typically see some raise in value of their property within a municipal boundary, because they have now more access to some of these services there. So make sure you're balancing those items out too at the local agency level. I know that's not directly related to impact fees, but it certainly ends up having an impact, no pun intended, on impact fees and those type of discussions in the future, service provisions for your community.
Looks like Jen is asking, can a local district establish an impact fee? Yes, just and the process is going to be very similar, but one thing to think about, right, was with like your enactment, instead of the local municipal council enacting that through an ordinance, it's a board, passing a resolution kind of a thing. But yes, local districts who provide municipal services do have the authority to impose impact fees. So, Brian, are there issues or special considerations for charging impact fees on redevelopment projects? That's a good one. So the whole idea with an impact fee is that you are charging the impact fee on an individual because they're having an impact on new impact, right? New impact on a facility. So I would say that would be the biggest consideration, is that with a redevelopment project, if I understand the question right, there may be a situation where you already have existing infrastructure and you already have existing uses in place. And then if you're redeveloping those, yeah, you kind of need to think about and include in your analysis, okay, as far as services existing and services currently provided, when you look at that as compared to the redevelopment, right, then you really only can charge impact fees for whatever the delta is between what the new development is causing, the new impact of the new development, compared with, what was existing prior. So one thing we'll often tell local communities, just to maybe provide some context, is if you have an existing residential home, right? Maybe it's from it was built in 1910 or something like that, and it has current water and sewer service and things like that. And maybe it's become dilapidated and it needs to, and someone comes along and purchases it and they want to rebuild it. For them to tear down that home and build another home, in most cases, and again, call us if you have specific situations, it would be inappropriate, right, to charge an impact fee in that scenario, because it's not a situation where there's new impact that the city is having to offset in providing services. It's just they're replacing existing impact, right? And so again, in a redevelopment context, if you're just replacing existing impact, then I would say you probably shouldn't be using impact or charging impact fees in those cases. But if you can show that, hey, the new development has a higher impact and a higher intensity, then you can probably charge impact fees to offset that need for new services. So,
yeah.
Anything else you'd add there, Rob?
No, I think you hit it dead on. That can be situation specific, but my usual advice to agencies is to be conservative in the approach that you take there, simply because those can be much more easily challenged. But it is to mitigate new development, new impact. So on a redevelopment item, if it's literally just going to replace the type of impact that was already present, then be cautious with that and be more on the conservative side.
That can you use impact fees to pay for new impact fee study or update? Yes, the statute does provide as far as overhead and the cost of you know, paying your consultants and things like that. You can roll that into the impact fee that you charge.
Yeah, and that goes to brand new and update as well. So you can do that again. Back to smaller communities and how many impact fees, how much impact fee they may be taking in. How long does that agency believe that it would take to recuperate those dollars that went out, right? All should be part of that initial thought process that an agency is going through when they're thinking about whether or not placing impact fees is right for them, because it might make sense to do it this year. It might make sense to wait a couple years. You know, it's individual to each community and what their development patterns and demands are right now, what type of development pressures they're feeling, and whether or not impact fees would make sense for them financially.
So Keith, that's a great point, right? So a good example, but if they build a fourplex, so back to the question about impact fees for replacing existing development or prior development. If they build a fourplex on that lot, there may be an impact fee associated with 3 units. Yeah, that would be the right way to do it, right? So if you've already captured the impact of a single family home on that lot, and then they're increasing the intensity of the use, then you just want to charge an impact fee for that increase in intensity, as opposed to you know, double dipping, quote unquote, on what's already been captured with the prior development. Good question. Do you see any more, Molly?
I don't see any more. Any other? We have about time for one more question if anyone wants to pop one in the chat or Q&A box. Otherwise, big round of applause and thanks to Jordan and Rob for taking their time to share their expertise with us. And they had their contact info up at the beginning, but if you have any other questions, feel free to connect with them or league staff and we can help connect you with them. But really appreciate everyone's time today. Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks, everybody.